Okay, how about now? Forgot to press go live. If you guys can hear me, please let me know in the chat. That way we can get going instead of having to wait. Sweet. Okay, you guys can hear me. That's great. We're gonna wait a couple minutes just for some of the stragglers to come along, because it'll just be easier for all of us. But I'm gonna get some basic stuff set up before then, or at least. Okay, anyone who was on my talk last time, any recommendations for what I should be doing better or differently? Because I've gotten one comment on repeating questions before answering them, which is awesome. I like that one. Anything else? We'll get started at in a minute, just a minute, and then go ahead and start the demo. Okay, I'll go and get started. So today what we'll basically be doing is making a basic front and back end, but that's not the focus. That's supposed to be really simple. It's not going to really do much, but after that point, we're going to deploy that to a web server. The only reason I'm building that front end and back end again is we may have some new viewers who were not here last time, and they may not have their front and back end we built out. So I'm going to make something really simple, and then we're going to deploy that to AWS EC2, which is AWS's virtual machine, or I guess it's not a virtual machine, it's an actual machine, but their cloud-based system for running code, running processes, and so on. What this is really good for is for deploying code quickly to make it public, make it available, so that's not just localhost, right? Oftentimes developers will work localhost. You'll see a bunch of, all the changes localhost, and it's really quick. But you'll wonder, this code is running locally, but how do I get that code from my system to something like Google? How do I get it to make it public? How do I make it visible? How do I get other people to use it, right? Because that's quite a big step. So that's going to be the introductory focus of this webinar today. So I'm going to go ahead and create the same things we did last time. If you guys are not familiar with React or Node, you can go ahead and watch the previous tutorial we have set up here. It's on the same channel. We did it, I think, last week and the week before that. But go ahead and get that checked out. So I'm just going to create a basic React app. It's not going to do anything fancy. I just want to have a front and back end so that we can see like the full stack app being deployed, how it works, and so on. And one more thing I'm going to use today is this thing called Nginx. It's spelled Nginx, which is a funky spelling. But what it's going to basically do is enable fast serving of files and data from our server, from a client. So it's a thing like, if you guys have heard of Apache, it's the same idea. It's really fast, efficient file serving and caching and other mechanisms to make your website extremely fast. And again, as always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to stop me at any point. I'll make an attempt to answer those as soon as possible so that you guys don't get lost. Commands in the chat. Like all the commands in the chat, like each and every one of them. Just to clarify. Okay. Yeah, I mean, sure. Maybe the long ones. Reason being, I don't want to put all of them because that's like. Okay, that's a long one, sure. I'm not going to put all of them, though. There's going to be a lot of CDs and a lot of LSs, which obviously I do not have to replicate multiple times. All right, so we have the back end, the front end going. I'm going to make a client called server and then npm init. So this initializes npm in this package, and this will let us use the node environment, right? So it's node package manager. What's the best documentation for this? I would recommend. There's a lot of good YouTube tutorials for this. So the question is, what's the best documentation for this, right? Another way of solving this is actually to watch a good tutorial. I like the Udemy ones by Stephen Grider. I'm not getting paid for anything he does, but like I felt that was really valuable towards my own progress in this field. In both the front end, back end, and the full stack, he's quite knowledgeable in a variety of areas, and he has really approachable tutorials that ease you into a topic quite well. Other documentation, I'm really just doing hello worlds and getting used to like the basic building blocks of this, and then moving from that point onwards. Right, so I'm going to create a new file in my server called. I'm going to be using TypeScript mainly because I just like TypeScript, but it's not going to make much of a difference. I'm going to set up Express, which is a server framework. So this is something like Tomcat in Java, or I guess Bison in Golang, Ruby has Sinatra, that kind of stuff. Python, Django, Flask. Right, so we installed Express. I'm going to do types. Function import Express from Express. Right. We also actually need one more library. Excuse me. So, and CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. So essentially what it does is it's a security feature that prevents people from using a client and accessing different websites and so on. If you have CORS enabled, that prevents anything but your own client from accessing your backend. And this is something we'll just need to actually prevent CORS from stop doing things, if that makes sense. I'm going to set up a basic app. I'll be using ES6 syntax, which is just a different version of JavaScript. I mean, it's not different, it's one of the newer versions of JavaScript with arrow functions and so on. And I'll do a basic get here just to verify our server is actually running. Take in a request and a response. And it'll output something. Right, so we'll just do response dot status at the 200 status, which means good. And then just send a response object saying hello from the backend. And let's say app.use CORS, app.use body parser.json, and there's one more body parser.url encoded, and this one is like extended equals true. And the place I'm getting this, well, I'm not, let me show you where you can find resources on this. You would look up body parser express, and you would find documentation here. So what this does is essentially, it's a body parsing middleware. And what a body parser is it basically reads the JSON body and post requests. So GET requests don't have bodies, but posts do. And posts let you send data in that body, JSON body. And this actually parses that out in the request and sends it to your backend as well. It's a middleware. And a middleware basically means something between a client-side request and the code that handles it on your side of things. It's like an intermediary. If you guys are familiar with like the pipes and filters architecture, where you have like an object and you pass it to the next thing in the pipe, and the next object, and the next object, a middleware goes in the middle. All right, so any documentation on this will tell you to basically set up these two fields here. And this will basically let us, what we'll do is first compile this using TypeScript called TSC, and this is the TypeScript compiler, and then do Nodejs.js. And this will get our server up and running on port 8080, and this will be localhost here. So localhost 8080, got this request, got the response here. You can see response hello from backend. If you went with the unformatted code, it looks like this. Anyway, let's move on to the front end of things. Right, let's open up a new console. Let's go to public source app.js. I'm not going to make this TypeScript because we're not going to be doing much coding. It'll be very basic, just a request from the front end to back end. So I'll cd into my client directory, and I'll do npm I save. We'll be using Axios. Stop that. I can't spell. Right, so I guess you guys wanted this. Oh, by the way, any questions till this point? Did it make sense? We're doing the back end. All we did is set up a basic route on the / page of port 8080, and we get this response back. Nothing else is being done. We just have a listening port. Right, so we install this now. What we can do is run npm start in our client, and this will get our React app up and running. And so we'll get a new screen that pops up here on port 3000. Oh, I thought there's something running on 3000. Sweet. So we got the basic React app here at source.app.js. So this is the very basic React app that's deployed. Nothing too interesting. What we'll do here is just do some basic styling on this page and get actually do a request from the backend. So we got the Axios module. We're going to get Axios here. We'll then say, I'm going to use something called React hooks. Don't have to worry too much about it. But would definitely recommend looking into React and React hooks. It's basically just a way to do life cycle, and unfortunately requires some knowledge of React. But it's a way to do state changes in React without having to do class-based components. So the goal here is to get content from the backend and display that to the front end. But because network calls are asynchronous, meaning that they don't resolve immediately, they're not blocking in JavaScript, we have to essentially wait for that content to first be downloaded from the backend to the front end, and then render that content, if that makes sense. So there's a field on the response of an Axios request called data, and we're just going to print out that data for now. And we're actually going to, my apologies, we actually need something here called setup proxy. And this will all make more sense. I apologize for skipping a lot of the details. It's not the focus of this webinar. We went over the stuff from the last one. But there is something called HTTP proxy middleware for React. And what this does is basically lets you call. Let me actually just go over that again quickly in paint.net. Explain why we need this. Right, so with the so this is going to be dev. Right, here we have on port 3000, we have React running. And here on 8080, we have Node running. Right, so essentially when React tries to do a request to the slash, what this is actually doing is it's trying to get to the back end of 3000. Because this is actually running inside the web browser. Well, we want this request to go to Node here. Right. So that's actually why we have this proxy in the middle that I just downloaded to send the request from here to here. The difference is in production, we have Node here on ports, usually 80 or 443, depending if you're using HTTP or HTTPS. And then we have React down here on the web server side, and they're on the same port. And the difference is here you have everything on the same port, here it's different ports. This is for dev, this is prod, or when we deploy it, it's going to look like this. And so what we need is to prevent us from having to change our URLs between development and production. We use this proxy in the middle to basically override all these back requests and push them to here instead. All right, so hope that makes sense. Just going to install that. I'm actually going to just pull up some code I have for that process. It's only something you do once, so it's not something you really need to like know. It's just something you have to know how to do once. All right, so what this does essentially routes everything starting with /API to this URL we specify, which is localhost 8080. All right, so what we'll do here is just run this. So create React app automatically recognizes setup proxy, and it goes ahead and runs that. So, right, the reason I changed that is the new version of React of HTTP proxy middleware has a different. It's a breaking change compared to the old one, so you have to change this to match that. So use state is not defined. If it's not defined, that means we haven't imported correctly. So we have to go back here. Sorry, a lot of tabs, and import this from React. Right. So we did that. We get an update here. We can then press F12, look at the console, and we see this content here. So this content is actually, it's the slash, let's do /API. And here, let's change this to /API. Let's kill that, the old server. Let's build the server again. And then let's do nodeindex.js. And this gets your new server up at /API. This front end is now querying. Let me close this. This front end is now querying our backend at /API. We get the response hello from backend, right? So that's the front end backend integration. Let us then go back to the app, and let's just display the content here instead of learn React. Take out this paragraph tag. Add a new tag. And here we'll just say, so we got the content back here. And let's do set content response.data. And a response.data has a response field. So let's dot response.data.response. Response.data gives us the entire field. And let's do here, just display content. And let's initialize this to data still loading. Right, if you see there's a brief flicker of when it says data still loading, but because it's localhost, it's very quick. Anyway, so this is the front end backend. Let's not worry too much about this. We just have code that we want to deploy, and that's the idea. Any questions at this point, guys? Please feel free to ask any questions. We're going to move on to the next step, which is deployment now. So please ask me any questions before I move on and you get lost. Well, if it makes sense, please tell me it makes sense in the chat. Okay. Sweet. So what I'm going to do is open up an AWS console. If you guys do not have AWS, you can sign up for one. This won't cost any money for us because we're going to be using a free tier instance. So a free tier means that you don't pay anything for the first 750 hours, I believe, of usage. So that's about a month of free hosting. So what we'll do is go to this thing. Well, EC2 is right here, but you can also go show it up and search for EC2. So let's go to instances. Actually, let me sign to a different account. Sorry, guys. That's not my account. Right, so go to EC2. I only saw one yes for making sense. Is anyone confused? Does anyone want me to go over anything I just did? Please feel free to ask me anything. There's no stupid questions. I am here to help you, so. Anyway. I'll wait 10 seconds, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to answer Bruce's question of what kind of things can you host on EC2. And that's basically, you can host anything on EC2 in the sense that anything with outside connections, any kind of server you want to host, any kind of, even a database you can host on EC2s. Databases, WebSocket connections, HTTP connections, REST APIs, any kind of application backend you need application server and you can host on EC2s. basically anything you need to, an EC2 will do. It's a machine. It's like your own machine on your system, on your local laptop, except it's remote instead of local. Thanks for that question. So they have a bunch of different types of Linux you can use. I prefer to use the classic Ubuntu. So I'm going to go with Ubuntu here. And then I'm going to just click the micro here. Actually, I'll go with the small. So the small isn't free, but yeah, so you can do, I mean, if you, any kind of code you can run on EC2, it's just a machine, right? Just like as much as your, it's a whole machine. It's not, okay. Technically, it's a piece of a machine. There's no guarantee you own the entire machine, but to you, there's an abstraction, which basically shows that, for this account, I'm answering Caitlin's question. On this system, on this account, I have 2 EC2 instances running for a software engineering project. On different accounts, I have some for my clients that are running to host like different websites and stuff, which is about to sign that old account. But this one is just for software engineering. It just hosts a basic web app. I'm gonna go with the small because it is a little easier. It has more compute power, so it'll install dependencies a little easier. So really, starting out, you just have to worry about this, and then you can skip the configure instance. Usually you don't have to deal with the stuff. It's a little more advanced than what we need. Storage, if you want to add more storage, you can go up to 24, like 128. I think the last time I checked, it's 10 cents per gigabyte a month. So 8 gigabytes gives you, I guess, 80 cents a month for storage. Right, so this is the last thing you have to really think about is the security group. So we're going to create a new security group. So I'm going to say open web access. And what a security group does is essentially it's like a firewall around your system, right? It configures who can access your system at all, which IPs they can access. If you want to configure your system so only other systems can talk to it, other EC2s, you can configure that as well. And so really, it's from a security point of view, I only want these systems to be able to talk to my EC2 to prevent hacking, to prevent security breaches. If it's internal information, you can say just block it entirely. If you have a company, you can say, I only want this set of IP addresses to be able to access the system, and so on. So obviously, Ubuntu has its own firewall called UFW, but this is another one on top of that, which AWS provides for you, which is like an external firewall. There's multiple layers of security here. I'm going to just call it open HTTP access. Right, so leave the SSH rule in. Operator. I'll leave the code up to the right so Saksham can take a look at what I did. Right. I'll zoom out on the left a little bit. Is this still? So for Moose's question, is there good documentation on these configurations? So AWS is known for sometimes having good doc and sometimes having really, really bad doc. Having worked there, I know it's very hit or miss. But this specific one for EC2 has pretty good documentation. So EC2 documentation, and if it's not official AWS documentation, it's a lot of setups online. Thanks, I took a picture. Yeah, sure. There's a lot of setups online on basically how to do it, which are not provided by AWS. So actually, AWS has one on this, funny enough. Anyway, anyone interested for Node.js on this? Basically what I'll be following to some extent. Anyway, what we have to do for this is we want to be able to expose HTTP and HTTPS traffic. We don't really have a HTTPS certification, certificate, to be able to have a custom domain. That's something I can do in the future if anyone's interested on setting up the DNS records and the A names and so on. But what we want is essentially we want to set up, if you just look up HTTP, they have a preset on port 80, and we'll just let this be anywhere, right? Like anyone can access this port on 80, no restrictions. And then same for HTTPS, even though this isn't really important for production, this is what you want to use. or something similar. So this is SSH into machine. This is HTTP traffic. This is HTTPS traffic. So HTTPS is like this little certificate you'll see in the top left. For like servers that are not HTTPS, you won't see that certificate. It'll say unsecure or something like that. And we can say review and launch. I'm going to say this looks good. And then say launch. So by the way, we need to create a PEM key, which is basically it's a security-based key for SSH. SSH uses a asymmetric, I think it's symmetric. It's some kind of encryption system with public and private keys. I think it's RSA. But essentially, what we have to do is generate a key to be able to log in. This is the public. This is the private key, and then AWS, the instance has a public key. But the key thing is that But what we have to do, basically keep track of, is don't lose this key. If you lose the key, you won't be able to log in. You literally have to either delete your instance or copy your instance from the old state to a new state, or you won't be able to access the data, is what I'm saying. So don't do it. It gets messy. Create new pair. I'll say deployment or deploy.pem, or just deploy. Actually, deploy.pem puts another pem at the end, so just say deploy. Download that key. We get the key downloaded here. We'll then say launch instances. Cool. So this will take a little second because AWS is slow and it takes its sweet time at launching. But hopefully it'll be up and running in 5 minutes or so. Right. So in the meanwhile, while that's getting set up, I'm going to go over how our system will look. Essentially, right, so how it'll look is we'll have a browser, or let's say like web clients here. Yeah, AWS is not very fast at booting things up. Oh, never mind, it's up and running. That's fine. But it really depends. It'll take a while. There's a lot of variability. Anyway, it'll send a request to our server instance here, right? So this is our EC2. And so this has its own IP address, which we can access. So like an IP address is it better on non-free tiers? So Musu's question, is it better on non-free tiers? I actually don't know, I haven't checked. I think it also depends on how much storage space it has to provision, in the sense of 8 gigs versus like 128 gigs. I assume it might be. I don't think they put as much priority on EC2s, but that's just my own experience. It may also be a demand-based thing. I don't quite know, to be honest. Anyway, so this has a series of steps, right? So here we'll have Nginx. Here we will have the Nginx, and then we'll have server. And so this is a two-way communication between Nginx and the server. Hey, Caitlin worked at AWS as well, didn't she? She can help you guys. Anyway, so we have Nginx working here in the front of our server. They handle requests for basically any kind of information. So both server-side requests and client-side requests. So Nginx will also be serving our static website. So static website meaning React. And when I say React, this is really meaningless. It doesn't really care about React. All it does is serves built files in JS, HTML, CSS, any images as well. It'll serve. And you can configure what you want Nginx to handle. But the reason you want to prefer Nginx over something like Node.js is Node.js really is twofold. One is that JavaScript is single-threaded, meaning it works on basically a single thread, right? There's no additional threads. Asynchronicity is not really an additional thread. It's just like delayed processing. You can look at the difference between, I guess, like async and multi-threading later on. But essentially, it's still the same event loop, which means it's the same thread. And the issue with that is if you're spending time reading images from disk, and by the way, disk is very slow, that's time that's not being spent processing server requests, right? So from a purely separation of concerns basis, it's not good to have the same server that's doing really slow I/O off the disk to be trying to handle relatively low latency responses from the client, because you're throttling your own system essentially. And so what Nginx does is it provides and also like the other thing is that Node.js doesn't do caching of images, so each and every time you get a request, you have to read it off disk, and it's very slow. Nginx optimizes for that basically by using volatile storage in RAM to be able to store that information and images in RAM instead of storing in disk. And so access times are like 100 times quicker or something. And you can improve website performance much quicker. Cache policies have been configured. It also does different types of encryption, so like gzip, which is a encryption algorithm. You can also use custom builds. I'm actually using this one module by Google called Broadly, which I found does even better than gzip. But it's like a compression format that Google built out. And they built a Nginx module. And so you're actually able to build this and then insert it into Nginx. It's very configurable. But the idea is that Nginx will be working as a proxy between our server and our front end. All requests, if Nginx can't handle it, will be sent to our backend. When I mean backend, I mean this. And if it can handle it, it'll handle it itself and send it back. So it's lower latency. Right. So let's get the IP for this boy. All right. So the IP here. So ignore the micros. My apologies. We just really want to look at this one. Right, this one we care about. So let's get the IP for this one. That's 57.71.202.170. Right, so let's actually go to a command line. Let's open up a new console. I'm going to use WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, but you can also just as easily use something like PuTTY or use something like OpenSSH on Windows. If you have a MingGW or GNU-based command line in your system, Cygwin on your system, you can also use SSH off those. Those emulate Linux tools in a Windows environment. Right. So actually, one thing, our download, we need the PEM file, and our PEM file was in downloads. Right. So what I'll do is actually WSL in this directory here, and we have to move this into Linux. So I'll move we named it deploy.pem. I'm going to move that into my home directory. Oops. MB. Right, so now we have deploy here. I'm going to move deploy into AWS keys, just because that's where I keep all my AWS keys. But one thing we have to do is do chmod 400, and what 400 does is it basically, actually I'll show you. Right, if we try doing ssh-i, I'll post this in the comments very briefly. It'll say permissions require that private keys are not accessible to others. And so it actually denies us. Let me post this. So what we actually want to do is go back into that file and do chmod 400, and this one basically prevents other people from accessing and makes it a read-only file, and do deploy.pem, and then try that again. Now it should work. Oops, not root, do Ubuntu here. Come on. Right, so this actually lets us log in, which is pretty cool. And now we're in that virtual machine that's on the EC2 instance. So we have to actually do two things: sudo apt get update and sudo apt get And these essentially initialize the remote repositories for apt-get, which is like, it's like npm or it's like pip for Python. And what it does is it gives us a lot of existing libraries which we can install from using apt-get. And so I'm actually going to Google this. Nginx Ubuntu. So DigitalOcean has a pretty good tutorial on this. No, it's pretty simple. So sudo apt-get and sudo apt install. And I'm actually going to create a GitHub repository just so I can upload my code and use that. So there's multiple ways of doing deployments. The stupidest way is using a GitHub repository. Also the easiest way for someone who doesn't want to get too much into CI/CD pipelines. But a better way of doing it is using something called CI/CD, as I just hinted to, which is essentially continuous integration, continuous deployment. And what CI/CD means is essentially if you have code, that code may change over time. And importantly, you also want to have the clients update to those changes, right? And so what CI/CD does is sorry about that. I just gotta do some things like adding it to the git ignore so we don't add all of node modules to the repository. Did I lose anyone? Does anyone feel confused at this point, or does everyone feel like it makes sense for them? What I'm doing is just adding all my files to Git. I'm going to commit those, saying, I don't know, commit one. And I'll do git remote add origin. Take that. Oops. Okay. Git remote. I'll do a push to my remote. And now I have my code up on GitHub in just a second. Yeah, so this is the repo that'll be at if you guys are interested. But what we'll do is go back to that original server we had and do a git clone on this repository. And because it's public, clones immediately. We have deployment, but the issue is we don't have npm, right? So we try to do npmi, we don't have npm to do installation of dependencies. So we have to actually go here and do node on Ubuntu, and DigitalOcean again has a really good tutorial on this. I prefer this one, using NVM. Just copy paste, and then we have to do the +x does, what's it be executable? I don't think you actually have to do both +x and bash that, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's already installed, so we don't have to. And then we have to add it to the current. If you restart the system, it'll add nvm to our current directory. So we try to do npm now. we have to install the version that we want of npm. Let's do 10.0. And so as you can see here, we use nvm install to name the version we want. nvm install, let's do 10.0. Actually, let's see what version I have. So I have 10.14.2. 10.14. Okay. So now we have Node.js, and we also have npm as well. So let's do npm. Let's go into our client and do npmi. This will take a hot second. Any questions at this point, guys? Anything where it's unclear what we're doing or why we're doing it? Oftentimes with these technologies, it seems like, why do you have such a complicated system? What's the point of doing it, right? And if you have any such questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Same thing on the server, installing. All right, so we also need to do npm ig TypeScript tsc. We can do tsc here. And we get the index.js, so that works fantastically. All right, so server running, that's great. Go to the client, check out what's in here. Got to do npm run build. This will build our client into that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which we can then send to the front end. So this is that build version, right? So this is what Nginx will be sending from our server to the front end of things. All right, so let's actually do something, and let's change our configuration. Excuse me. Let's change the security group here. And because our server is running on 8080, let's actually make 8080 exposed to the public. Remember, unless you expose something manually, it's not going to show up. So we have to go here, say edit inbound rules, add a rule for 8080, and then, my bad, for TCP, and then say 8080 anywhere. And the reason it's TCP and not HTTP is because TCP is specifically is any kind of port. HTTP is specifically on 80. So at least the way Amazon does it. Right, so we exposed 8080 to the public. With AWS, security is one of those things that comes first. And so security updates are done instantaneously. Other things, not so much. But essentially what that lets us do is we can then close out of these and then open up our instance on port 8080. And hopefully, oh, guess not. Oh, we have to run the server. That is key. And do node index.js. Server is running. Let's go back, reload. And let's actually go to / yeah. Oh, there we go. We actually have a response on that server coming from our backend node that's running on that EC2 instance. All right, and you can have the API if you want. There's nothing fascinating going on there, but that's the raw IP. They also have, you can also add a DNS name to that to make it fancy, your own domain and so on. Right, so essentially what we've done now is we have code running on that remote instance, but we don't really have any kind of meaningful front end going on. It's just the back end, right? So ideally we have both the front end and the back end going. So I'm going to install a module called, actually I'm going to open up the second command line window. And again, do ssh-i And the cool thing with SSH is you can have as many concurrent connections as you want, or as the system supports. So you can open up like 5 concurrent windows if you really want. Oftentimes you'll need to. Anyway, so over here, I'm going to do sudo nginx, sudo service, just sudo nginx actually works. And you see we're failing to bind, which means that nginx is 1 installed, but 2, if you're not binding, that means something else is actually already running on that. So we can check our logs by doing kernelctl -u and then do nginx. And you can follow that with -f, but simply check your logs for nginx. Any questions till this point? We have nginx installed. It's not really doing anything. Let's see how we can configure that to actually do something. But please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, how many people actually get what I'm doing? How many people are entirely lost? Hello? Get the rough idea. Okay. Okay, cool. So let me show what we've done on this diagram that we have set up here. At the moment, we've gotten the web client. This is us in Chrome, right? This is the EC2. So we got the EC2 set up. We got port 8080. So our server is on 8080, right? So by doing a get, so by the way, when you open up your server, the web console, and you put in an IP here, and you do some kind of request, this is a get request. Okay, this is what by default what web clients do. It's a get, meaning it's a read only. There should be no writes going on. But this get at /API then routes to our server directly on port 8080. The reason it's going to 8080 is we have 1 specified 8080 in our console, in our IP up here, and 2 in the AWS console, we have allowed 8080 to be exposed. So by default, in a regular system, everything's exposed, but AWS blocks everything by default. So then you have to go and expose what you want to expose. So 8080 here is exposed on. So this is IPv4 anywhere. This is IPv6 is anywhere. These are just different forms for IP addresses, but they both mean the same thing. So what this does is essentially lets any single access. So you can actually access my server right now, and the reason being that I let anywhere access it. But if I specified only my system, my IP, you wouldn't be able to access this. Well, we've configured it to be accessible anywhere. We've then set up this server that we can talk to, and we've then done a get to that. And using that get, we can then get this data from the backend, which we have specified here. Right? What happened? Yeah, I just killed my server, which is why it isn't working. But let's talk about how we get the front end to run, right? Because what we really want is in this diagram, and in reality, we want the front end to show. We don't want us directly hitting the back end. Like, what is the point of that? So the goal now is to get Nginx to be able to find these files for React, these statically built HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then send it to the front end. At the moment, we have the back end running. What this tells us is that the front end could call our back end if we wanted to. What this doesn't tell us is if the front end is visible or not, right? Because at the moment it's not. So what we want to do next is make that front end visible in Nginx. So this will be a little complicated, unfortunately, just the way it is. But So Nginx has a bunch of configurations called sites available in the default config as well, but I'm going to mess with the default. Right, so I'm using Vim because I hate myself, but because Vim is nice. Let me actually plug in. So at a high level, what this meat really does is it's a configuration. I'm going to delete all this because we don't actually need it. It is a configuration that determines how to route requests at certain places. So for example, if I get a request on a certain port, how do I deal with that, right? What do I serve? What do I not serve? And so on. So what I'll do is here we'll see a listen at 80, and with the name default server, that is okay. That is totally fine. What we'll then do is, we don't actually need that. We don't have any SSL. SSL is what HTTPS use. We don't have any HTTPS, so we can ignore that. What we really care about is this, the root, right? What the root is where do I start serving files from? So what we'll do here is we'll actually open up a second window we had open in deployment. Here we have the client, right? And when we do npm run build, what we get is a directory called build. And we'll see here, there is a build directory right here. And if we ls build, we'll find a bunch of different kinds of data. There's static. If you ls static, see CSS, JS, and media. So these are a series of files which specify the CSS and JavaScript which are used in your main index file. So what we really need to do is serve this entire build folder. Okay. So what I'll do here is when I'm inside the build folder, I'll do a pwd, and it'll give me my current directory. I'll copy that. I'll then go into my editor and do that. All right, so what that means is essentially the main folder I'm looking into, the main place for all my builds and routes is this folder here. Okay. So I'll do a w, right? Make sure you use this in sudo. If you don't do it in sudo, then it won't actually let you write because it's a protected file. Our index file is index.html. You don't need the rest of those. Write that again. Server name we don't actually care about. And then location. All right. So if we get location, what that means is essentially if we get a request at this server. So if we get a request on port 80 at the slash route. So what that means for us is this at the slash route. How do I deal with that? Right, and it has a default configuration, but we don't really want that. How do I deal with that? So what I really expect when I hit port 80, and port 80 is a default, so when I go to like Google or something, that's really what I'm hitting. I'm hitting port 80, and it's upgrading to port 443 because it's HTTPS. It's actually redirecting behind the scenes, but essentially, what we want on port 80 is the site itself. This is the static HTML, CSS, and everything that gets bundled up. Right, so what we want here is on that slash, we want to try the URI and we actually want to just return this index.html. And the reason for this is that React is a client-side application, which means that everything is really being rendered by the index.html. Right? It looks like there's more, but really everything is in that index.html that's being rendered. I hope that makes some kind of sense. So really, like, if it were server-side rendered, we'd have different HTML files that we'd render, right? So like one for about, one for main page, one for the different kinds of accounts. I don't know, anything else you want to actually serve. But if it's client-side, everything is in that index.html file. So we don't really consider we don't really consider any other files to be served from the client. Again, I'm sorry if it's complicated. It's what it is, but that's what you get for deployment in that sense. It is a bit of work to get into, but the cool thing is your files then are really high performance and they render well, and you can serve them to everybody instead of just yourself. But I'm gonna do a write on this. I'll then do a test on my file, so I'll do a sudo nginx and -t. And so since syntax is okay, I'll do a sudo nginx, sudo service nginx reload. I'll actually go check my file out on my server and see if it's any good on just the main port. And so we're actually really cool, and we got the site up and running. So this is the React app that we built up earlier. You will notice when we go to the network tab, reload it, we get a bunch of data for the JS, for the JS here, the CSS chunk, and so on. And so this is the React app that is now rendered. It is deployed. The one issue you will notice is that we do not have any text rendering down here. And if you look in our sources, I mean, actually, look at our elements. It's not rendering any text in the center. And the reason being, we didn't actually, the backend is not able to be queried just yet, because we didn't really specify how to query the backend. So we actually have to do one more change in Nginx. We have to do location, and then do you guys remember what our backend routes start with? What do all our backend routes start with? Wow, we lost a lot of people. Sorry guys, I guess it's too confusing. Yep, /API. Moose is right. So we specify /API ahead of the /location, because it's usually good to specify in decreasing order of specificity. Right. So essentially, what we do is we actually specify proxy pass, and then we pass this back to the localhost client running at 8080, and we say proxy redirect is off. There's documentation on this on the Nginx website. I just sort of have to write it for now, because I can't explain all of it. So we test that, it's good. We then reload it, and then we're actually going to test the home page again. So this data is still loading for now. I guess something didn't quite work out. Oh, we have to get the server up and running. My bad. Right, so what we'll do is go to our server and then do node index.js. Server is running. Refresh this, and we get hello from the backend. And what you'll notice is, again, if you go to the network tab and reload this, we have requests going out to /API, and we can see the requests coming back with the data. So essentially, what we did was, let me show you what's going on here. So we have the web client up here. We then have Nginx here. And we have the server here. All right, so as a sequence of steps, so first is web client does a get slash, and then 2 is Nginx returns the HTML, the JS, and the CSS. 3, that CSS and JS then loads and does a request to /API. right? And this then for Nginx forwards the slash API request to 8080. And then this goes back to Nginx, and then Nginx sends it back to the front end. Right, so the flow looks like this. So web client does a request to Nginx, request, response, response. So this is for the backend slash API. Right, and there's also the React that goes directly for the get slash route. Does this make sense at a high level? Yes or no? Cool, sweet. Thanks, Jason. But yeah, so the way we configured this, let me go back into the code and explain what exactly the Nginx config does. I wanted to get it up and running. Now we can talk about more of what is going on. Right, so first line is listen. Listen basically is the same as the listen in Express, right? It starts listening on that port with the name default server. It then does root is this. So this basically tells us it's a relative directory to start looking at. Then the index is the index file. So index is commonly known as that main file for a landing page, right? So whenever you leave a backslash at the end of some kind of web page of any kind, so even google.slash or google.com/, that's the index file that's being loaded. So that's like the main file without doing any routing. When you log on, what page do I want rendered? That's the index file. So for us, we want the index file to be, as we can see here, so I'm looking at your console again, sorry guys. We want the index to be here in client, and then if we go inside client, do ls, we'll see a file called index.html, and that is the index file. So we specify our index file to be exactly that file. We're in the relative directory /build, so we can just specify the index file as being that same file, index.html. It's relative to the root, so it's this file here, right? And if we cap the index file, it's not very clean, but if you actually look at this, this is the exact same code as what's being get on the sources here. Right, if you prettify this file, this thing here is the exact same as this thing here, which makes sense because that's the index file that's being loaded. Right, this is loaded, and then it's being displayed here. So what this does is actually when it does the initial get, it'll then go and get each and every one of these links. So this link would then call and get this logo.192.png. And guess what? If we do an ls here, as we've done 50 times, we'll see a logo.192.png. This is referencing the exact same file. Then it does static.css.main, and if you take a fat guess, we do a static.css/main. What do we get? We get that same file of db105096. So this is actually loading those files, and it's done. It's this link. Each and every one of these links is a new request to the backend, right? And by backend, I mean it's really a request being handled by Nginx. So this request, because it does not start with API, it goes static. Is static start with API? No. So then it looks for the Nginx handler for that kind of content. The content is not API. The only other handler we have is that handler here of slash. And so what it first tries is it tries to get that URI itself, right? So what this try files does is it basically specifies an order in which I want to try getting data, right? So essentially it's a series of fallbacks. So the first fallback, or the first data source I try querying, is the URI itself. So in this case, I tried querying static /css /main, and for in our case, we actually do get that, because if you look at the relative directory here, this file does exist. Then it links against other data and so on. It gets all these data files. And then what it does is it gets these script data files here, but then the React code actually starts executing, right? The React code we have for this. And this code, as we look in our content over here, excuse me, we'll see an API call of /API, right? So this also does the same thing as what link does. It's called an XHR request, which we can see in the console here in the network. We can see different kinds of XHR requests here going out. There's also a request for JS and CSS, but I forgot what it stands for. XML HTTP request. I don't know if it's an actually XML, but it's a HTTP request between the front-end browser and the web server. It's a request being provided by the web browser itself, right? But these requests basically hit the /API endpoint. And because the thing listening on port 80 is not our server, it's Nginx. Nginx listens to this, sees that request, and handles it by looking for handlers, right? So the first handler described is /API. Does our request of /API match /API? Yeah, it does. So then it handles it by doing this. So proxy pass is basically, it forwards it. It's a proxy is like an intermediary between two systems. It hits the proxy, then redirects to 8080. And guess what we have running on 8080? Our actual server here, right? This Node.js server, as we bounded here, is listening on, is listening on 8080, this Express server, right? So then our Express server gets that endpoint, hits it, finds that request, and then deals with it by sending back the response, hello from the backend, with a response of 200. Right, so responses 200 is considered a success. Any failures are like 400s and 500s and so on. But our front end, after getting that response, sets the content of its web page to be the response data. And guess what that data is? That is this hello from the backend. Right, so this is then updated. We then have, because React basically is immutable, as soon as that data change happens, the page re-renders with this new content field. And this new content field is updated from the default state of data still loading to this new content of, backend response or whatever we sent from the backend. Right, so now that's rendered. So that's the data flow. And as soon as that happens, we can then see this reload of hello from the backend on our front end on this web server. So that is the complicated flow of how to deploy a front end and back end to a web server and use Nginx in the middle. And this is the typical process of deployment. Beyond this point, it's really quite easy in the sense that we can actually configure Nginx to use like gzip or Broadly or whatever else, or integrate in more APIs or some kind of encryption in the middle, HTTPS, DNS. Nginx supports all this out of the box, and so you have to do much less work than you would have to do otherwise. Any questions? I mean, it's literally just Jason, Mustafa, and someone else, but... Right, well... Cool, sweet. Thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate you staying all the way through. I'm gonna shut it off now. At 0.75 speed, okay. Yeah, of course. Oh, it's Suction, that's the last guy. Yeah, watch whatever speed you need to. I know it's a little fast. It's a little complicated because it's not really a common domain. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope it's valuable. Take care.